I'll still say good morning, everyone. Welcome to our, we started off doing a green buildings webinar and found three fabulous alums to tell us about different aspects of how to do a green building that you might not quite have expected. Anyway, I'm Sarah Simon, class of 72. I am I am the chair of the Energy, Environment, and Sustainability Network. We are an umbrella group for all different alumni groups around the world who are doing energy, environment, and sustainability kinds of work and activities and education for people. Educate, connect alums, which is why we try to put alumni on the panels, and then to act. Once we know each other, we can act together. And then MIT's folks acting together is a special thing. But anyway, this meeting, this webinar is going to be recorded. We're going to have the slides available. And so, you know, you could ask me that in the chat if you want, but that's the story. We always record and put the slides up afterwards. And with that, I'd like to introduce our three panelists. We'll hear first from, wait a minute.
Melissa Marsh.
Thank you. We'll hear a bio first from Melissa Marsh, who is a designer in New York. I'm going to call you a designer, but we'll hear the biographies first. Melissa, and then Margaret, and then Allison Friedman. And the order of speaking is going to be opposite. So they're going to give three presentations, fairly short presentations, and then in about a half an hour, we'll have a chance to comment and chat with each other. So take it away, Melissa.
Thank you, Sarah, so much. I'm really delighted to be here. Sarah and I met actually at ALC last fall, an amazing place to get together with fellow alumni leadership. My MIT credentials are I'm co-founder of Matarka, the MIT Architecture Alumni Affiliation. So those are for alumni who are interested in architecture, interiors, the built world. I'm also the current MIT Club of New York president and a Masters of Architecture 2004 student. And when I'll tell you a little bit more about what I do day to day in my formal presentation, but the bio is Barnard Columbia undergrad, architecture at MIT. I now lead an organization called Plastarc. I describe our work as social research and people analytics for the built environment. So in this conversation, I'll be adding a human capital and people factors layer to everything that we talk about in relation to sustainability. And I'm going to hand it over to Margaret for her intro.
Hello. I'm Margaret Reynolds. I'm an architect and a retrofit coordinator. I grew up in Southern Illinois, but I also lived in West Africa, France, and now I live in England, and I'm speaking to you from Cambridge, England at the moment. I first connected with MIT as a Harvard undergraduate. My senior year, I cross-registered for Lawrence Anderson's Level 1 studio, and work that I did at Harvard on Paris, creative reuse of historic buildings meant I was able to go and to the École Normale Supérieure in Paris for a year. Then I was back at MIT, finished in 1981, and have been licensed in the UK since 1983. My husband and I met at Harvard, and we live in England, as I say, and in Cambridge, and I've practiced in several local firms. In 1999, I received a grant from an engineering and physical sciences research council to do a further degree in environmental design, which is basically building physics. This was the start of the last 25 years of advocacy for low energy building design and eco-retrofit, alongside numerous research groups and charities, some of which I'll be speaking about. Incidentally, my family has a farm, an old farm at summer camp on Lake Winnipesaukee, New Hampshire, and we're there every summer, and we are in fact building a low energy addition at the moment. So I'm got a foot in both worlds. Thank you. I'll hand over to Allison.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for everyone for showing up this morning for really important topics. And I think I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's make sure. All right, so as long as you can see that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself and Rate It Green, and then launch into a presentation. I believe our topic is growing green building demand, but we can talk about anything else related to green building because that always makes me happy. But I'm very excited to be here to talk about a subject that is near and dear to my heart, as you will see. Okay, so I'm Allison Friedman, MBA 05. And what I'm going to do is talk to you about Rate It Green, give you an introduction to the resource. We'll make that brief, and then I'll give you some personal opinions on how I think we can grow green building demand and make safer, healthier, more sustainable buildings for everyone. And then you're going to see I'm going to race through because I want to leave plenty of time for Melissa and Margaret, and also Q&A. I want to hear what is on all of your minds and what you'd like to talk about. So with that, again, Allison Friedman, I Rate It Green, which is an online green building directory network resource to connect everyone in the green building community globally. I'm here in Massachusetts in the US, so we do tend to have a US focus, but we have people joining and talking from all around the world. And the idea, as you can see, our philosophy is that we can achieve more working all together for healthier and more sustainable buildings for everyone. We'd like to reach a time where we all have a wonderful building to breathe and be in and enjoy, live, work, and play. So we've created this space. And then the question is, what is everyone going to do with that space? And it's a joy for me to see what types of things people like to talk about and share, and to promote and get the information to as as possible. As I said, the idea is that a rising tide lifts all boats. And with that, I'll show you a little bit of a window into what we do. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so we have individual memberships on Rate It Green. Individuals can create profiles. Here you see 2 profiles, and then the discussions posted by one person, one of those people in their profile. Membership on the site is free. Everyone is welcome. Then we have companies can join the site, organizations can join the site. That is free, which is very important to me. If companies and organizations want to support future development, they can by going premium, but it's all optional. So you can see some profiles here of 2 manufacturers, 1 builder, build design organization. And here you can also get a glimpse on how people can browse products and services by category or location. So the idea is, again, a brief introduction. We bring all these individuals and organizations together so that they can connect and engage and decide what to share. So they can do that through the profiles that you saw, either individual, organizational. They can create discussions and groups around any location or green building topic. They can submit articles. They can post to our calendar, create videos, promote news for their organizations. And then we take all that information that people are sharing and amplify that up to 20 and up to 25 social media channels. So we are sharing that content, sharing that links, drawing people in and talk about green. We have an image of just a snapshot from our calendar from March with some of the green building events we've shared. I'm proud to say we've shared, hosted and promoted over 6,000 green building events since we started doing that. And here you can also see an article on a VRF heat pump project that I posted. That is an ongoing project, almost done. A video here on windows and energy efficiency, and then a snapshot of a group that I belong to, which is on the resource, which is Massachusetts Green Builders. I almost, that's enough for you to see, right? I almost threw in a snapshot of a video I looked this morning. I hadn't checked before, but I posted a video on a kitchen remote exhaust fan project. That's a mouthful, but we put a remote fan in our kitchen to reduce noise so people would actually use our hood. One of the most wonderful things you can do is get people to use your hood, especially if you have gas cooking. And over 4,000 people had viewed that video, so I was very excited. So that's a little bit of a window on the connecting and sharing on this platform and how I work to share green building information. But the goal here is also to take a step back and talk about growing green building demand. So I divided the factors and players into two parts, one of which I don't plan to spend too much time on. But so first of all would be government. And so here, I guess I would make 2 points. One, that state and local authorities play a big role when it comes to green building. Federally, as you know, there's quite a bit of uncertainty now, so I'll leave it mostly at that. We're not really sure what federal support is going to be for green building, clean energy, energy efficiency, equity. But the thing is that state and locally, that's where building codes are set. That is energy codes, building codes, zoning. So much can be done. Energy benchmarking. As an example of the power of states and municipalities, I would say that when the US first pulled out of the Paris Agreement, it turns out that over 60% of the population was covered by the Paris Agreement. Their local authorities had agreed to abide by those goals based on the actions of governors and mayors. So there is good news at the state and local level, point one. Point two here is that I wanted to share some related and helpful databases. So it has a funny name, but one of the most important resources to know about out there, if you're in the US, is DSIRE, which I believe is the database of state incentives for renewables and efficiency. Sometimes I get the exact words wrong, but DSIRE, if you look that up, if you put in your state, an incredible number of tax incentives and credit options will come up for you. So DSIRE is good to know about in terms of what actions you can get some financial support for. And then I included 3 state and local policy databases, ACEEE, USGBC, and I actually hadn't known that Columbia Law School also maintains a municipal green building law database. So there's definitely a lot going on in government, even if things are not looking so positively as they once did federally. Okay, so other than the government, there is the rest of us, and this is huge. Keep in mind that the growth of green building has been largely a voluntary market-driven movement, right? So you have media and nonprofit organizations, platforms like Rated Green, and some others. The certifiers have played a huge role. What would we be doing without, if the USGBC hadn't formed in the early 90s? So certifiers play such a big role, among other things. They've set these milestones that if you meet them for a project or a product or as a professional, they verify and assure the market that these criteria have been met. There are some great technical databases out there in the green building world. There's news organizations specifically devoted to green building. I do want to highlight companies and organizations. I know there can be a lot of cynicism for company-produced information. I don't feel that way. Sift through it. I think there are absolutely great manufacturers and service providers that have taken a leadership role, recognizing that it's important for the future, for future generations to create healthier and more sustainable items and projects. But also there's a business point to doing that. There's market leadership and marketing benefit to doing that. So I feel great about a lot of the work that manufacturers and service providers are doing. Also, retailers and distributors, the next 2 items have an asterisk for a reason. They might be parts of the market that I thought could play a larger role, and I still have some hope for retailers and distributors because they're at the point of sale. It's a great moment to be educating. Some do. Retailers, at one point, there were over 150 green building retailers. In the US, that number is lower. I haven't checked it recently, but many of them struggled to survive. But there are still some great stores left, and we should support them, and I hope they can do more educating. The other, I'm not going to name names. I thought about it. There's at least one huge global organization and many leading educational institutions that have basically built more green buildings than many countries. So I'm hoping that those organizations will take more of a leadership role in helping to grow the market and providing information for others. And then last but absolutely not least, individuals. And that's part of the market that we're trying to cover also with Rate It Green. Professionals, obviously, green building professionals are part of growing the market and can play a big role. But end users and consumers, which is one reason why it's important. Rate It Green is inclusive, Rate It Green is free, and that some other resources are free. Is that consumers and end users can become fairly expert fairly quickly and with good reason, right? If you are managing the build out for your company, by the time you've done that, there's a lot of information now that's retained knowledge in your head that you might be able to share, right? If you're a consumer and you have studied which heat pump to have for your house or how you want to make your home more energy efficient, by the time you're done studying that, you know more than most people out there, and you have something you can share and something you can do about that. So that brings me to the opinions that I would like to share with you today, the main part of my presentation, which is two, in quotes, because there's really three here, actions we can all take. Number one, ask for environmental information and health information every time, whether you're in a retail environment, whether you're specifying, you're shopping online, ask for information about toxicity, about how products are made, what processes are involved, if there's any certifications. On the right of this slide, you see a picture. These documents were given to me printed, but at least I can share them with you then and make good use of them. But this is from a designer. I can think of at least two designers I've worked with and one builder recently who just said to me, wow. And I could almost quote this one designer who sent me that information. He said, I asked for information about sustainability, and look, these companies had. That may seem not surprising to you if you're out there already having some experience, but there are plenty of folks out there in the building industry, not yet in the green building industry, who are surprised. And if you haven't yet started looking into this, there's so much information available, and it's in one company's share and also what they don't share, right? The same person had organizations say, oh, we don't have that information, or we don't make any, we don't do that. So it really can help you where to shop. So you'll make an impact on your own projects. But the other thing that's really important is that it's a signal. Every time a manufacturer is asked for this information, it shows them someone cares, keep creating those products. They're in business, of course, to make money, right? And so if they learn, I've had manufacturers say this to me, like, look, I make 10 things, 9 of them aren't sustainable. One is, if I see more demand, right? If they get that signal, keep making that, make more of your lines, more of your products green, they will do that. More likely. So, and then the other thing, so generally ask for information. You can also ask more advanced questions if you're aware of environmental product declarations, health product declarations, or if there are specific certifications and labels to ask for, then you're a really sophisticated buyer. But even asking it all, you're not asking a dumb question, and it really does tell them people care. So the second thing I would say should not be a surprise. Share. Once you've learned something, share it with your neighbor, share it with one person, share it with hundreds or thousands of people in any way or outlet. This is not about Rate It Green. Share it on a platform, share in your local community news, make a video. There's so many ways that you can share and have an impact with your information. People learn. For us to grow demand, people need to learn what's out there, and so they can start having opinions. And growing demand, part of that is asking your builder, asking your architect for what you want. That's part of one of my goals, is just to include more people in the conversation. When we forget about consumers and end users, we're cutting off a large part of the ability to grow demand because they don't know what to ask for. And then part 3, expanding educational efforts outside the industry. I am absolutely excited about how many people who are green builders show up at important regional and national conferences and speak and share what they know, and share on some platforms that might be industry related only, more for the trades. That's great. But again, just my passionate point for the day is just don't forget end users, don't forget consumers. The more you educate them, the more demand will grow. So I did prepare some information on current trends we could talk about, but I really want to get to the other speakers and to Q&A. So briefly, I will say that 4 of these obviously have to do with energy. There's smart technology, indoor air quality. We could spend days talking about. It's so important. I thought COVID would get more attention to indoor air quality that would stick and grow. Some yes, some no. Top challenges, 2 things I would say. Information access is important. That's the part of the industry I work on, trying to make more information available to more people and organizations. And then it's worth knowing that our workforce may be insufficient for some of the goals we have in terms of growing green building. And then almost lastly, I will share that the topics for green building are limitless, really limitless. So you can see we have some pieces on heat pumps, gas cooking. We've got an earth sheltered home someone's talking about recently on our platform. That's going to be all covered with just selected openings. You won't see it when you walk by. I think that's so cool. Customized switches, they look like light switches, but they're measuring your indoor air quality. 2 companies, here are examples. One's talking about pea cycling. Last finally would be plastic recycling bags and loose plastic. So last, I wanted to share a bit about other resources. So this is about, you can have content about content. This is other green building resources that are, there is a link in here, which might come up in the slides eventually, but it's about other organizations. There's about 15 organizations nationally that consistently host webinars that are largely free. So that is worth knowing about. And that was the end. So I just want to say thank you, get to our other speakers and Q&A. And also, we're completely in the middle of a great process to renovate Read It Green right now. So if people want to get involved and tell me what they really want for new features, we're keeping all the content, but we're going to keep changing and growing, and I'd love to hear it. And that's everything. All right, so I can stop sharing.
Thank you, Margaret. It's you're up, Margaret. Renovations, which is what an awful lot of us need.
Right. Thank you very much. That was just great, Allison. All kinds of interesting things. Just to recap again, I lived and work, and I work in Cambridge, England, and I'm here for the past 40 years. So some distance and time away from MIT. But as I say, I'm in New Hampshire in the summers. So here's the problem. Buildings use 40% of the total energy, including 3/4 of all US electricity. That's 35% of our carbon emissions. It's essential to make buildings a climate solution when we build new and when we renovate old buildings. We spend 90% of our time indoors, so lowering house and workplace energy has a big impact on your personal carbon footprint. Today, I'm going to talk about 2 projects, one as a consultant and one recently completed by my practice. However, I first want to look at the local climate activist organization here in Cambridge that produced and archived case studies for these 2 design projects. We'll look at the role of this charity in promoting investment in green building. The organization is called Open Eco Homes, although in fact it includes other buildings besides houses. And OEH has promoted free annual tours of low carbon buildings locally, supporting people in their retrofit journey for the past 15 years. We'll look at that again later. Open Eco Homes is in fact one of many projects run by an umbrella charity called Cambridge Carbon Footprint since its founding in 2008. In the CCF annual report, you can also read, we run 45 repair cafes. And if you want to know more about that, send me a note in the chat. Zero carbon training for city government officials, as well as free thermal imaging camera training. And by the way, thermal imaging camera training deals with hundreds of people each year. And this past year, we had 603 people borrow cameras from 16 hosts in a 25-mile radius around this one city. The Cambridge Carbon Footprint's annual budget has grown from small change to about 160,000 per annum. It's not huge. The sourcing is split equally between local government grants and private donations, but mostly everything relies on 2021 volunteers giving 12,700 hours a year. So we're very lucky in that respect. As you might imagine, this has had a major impact on the city. So let's look at the first case study. Here's a short version. This comes from the OEH talk that I gave on city center church redevelopment. So I'm a sustainability advisor for a $6 million church renovation in the center of Cambridge. The site was completely reorganized for weekday reception, disabled access, larger kitchens, new garden. Roof and windows were insulated with new heating, cooling, and ventilation. To the halls, we added solar panels, and here's, I don't know if you can see my cursor there, I'll try that. Windows and doors, skylights, and yet more insulation, and obviously daylighting, and then LED lights throughout. We switched to 100% renewable electricity. I mean, we have a lot of wind power in Britain. You can do that. It's not cheap, but you can do it. Carbon emissions, comparing utility bills, were reduced by 80% in the first year. My second project is called a Passive House Retrofit of a home in Cambridge, UK. Here's before a real estate brochure and the photo, and then after, they look pretty much similar, except there were additions and solar panels front and back. Following Passive House design methods, we used triple pane windows, energy recovery ventilation, air source heat pump, 6 inches of continuous insulation from the roof ridge right down externally, and it's a solid masonry building, to the foundations, and then under the floors, both new concrete slabs and old suspended timber. The most crucial requirement of Passive House is inside this insulation envelope. Critically, a continuous airtight barrier was installed, preventing energy leakage anywhere through floor, walls, or roofs. We got the airtightness down from 5 air changes per hour to 1.6, and that was very hard work. We modeled this building using Passive House software. I can talk more about this if there's interest. Again, comparing the utility bills before and after, carbon emissions have been reduced by 78%. So let's go back and look at the Open Eco Homes annual report. We ran 23 tours of 9 properties, both in person, but also online. 7 expert talks ran from July to October, often picking up things that were shown in these buildings. Total attendance was 384 people, but the OEH YouTube videos had 39,000, nearly 40,000 views. You can really make a difference. You record and put it out there. Few points to make about Cambridge carbon footprint and Open Eco Homes. The charity was started with a grant from the city, and each year the funding request had to analyze what was successful and where the growth areas were and what things weren't worth continuing. In the early days, we'd been looking at personal carbon footprints, and we were surprised at the number of people who were interested in home improvement. Who knew? We were inspired to act. These people were inspired to act when they saw what other people had achieved. They were willing to take a lot of time, as Allison says, doing their own research. And then, again, surprise, they were happy to share not just their successes, but their mistakes with others embarking on the journey, even to the point of welcoming them into their own houses on tour. So we now have 93 case studies on our website, which is going to show up on the documentation for this webinar. And these are indexed by the different retrofit measures. So if you're looking at heat pumps, you can see all the people locally and often they're near you who have put in heat pumps. All of this with an annual grant rising last year to about $35,000. Split the city, county, charities, sponsors, and only $380 from tickets, because we finally broke down and started charging for the tours because people were signing up and then not turning up. So we had to make it to try and prevent that. And at Cambridge Carbon Footprint, we didn't invent this formula. We copied it. We copied it from the city of Bristol, and we gradually adapted it for our community. It seems to me there are a lot of elements that can be replicated and adapted. Case studies archived on the website. We do an 8.5 by 11 page front and back, and that's a PDF on the website. And that, as I say, indexed by the measures. Tours and talks on YouTube, Zoom tours and discussions, and then Zoom talks on key topics, but critically, armies of volunteers. I'd like to end by looking forward. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development works worldwide, and they are looking ahead at 28 countries, anticipating a significant shift toward whole life carbon politics. Concern for embodied carbon and better materials will increase, they say, from 14% to 43%. Looking at recycling of materials from 11% to 68%. Rising temperatures and urban heat island effects are causing countries to prioritize cooling over heating, with an emphasis on passive cooling design. Meanwhile, 76% of countries plan to prioritize retrofitting existing buildings over constructing new ones, a significant increase, 76% over the current 39%. And most places, 60% of the countries reported the key challenge is to make decarbonization measures affordable. So if we can demand, as Alison says, if we can develop demand for lower carbon living, then in the same way that happened with solar panels, higher demand should lower costs, and lower costs should increase demand. These days, as Alison says again, we cannot expect climate leadership at federal level. This leaves state and local level, and I believe individuals and communities derive benefits from exploring local solutions, building solutions together. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. I will jump right in. Hello, everyone, from whatever part of the world you're tuning in from, morning, noon, or night. I am Melissa Marsh. As I mentioned, we'll be talking a little bit about the human behavior aspect of sustainability. And would like to clarify briefly that a relatively limited amount of my work is in the category of residential. Rather, it is in public and commercial buildings, though a range of building typologies, academic, office, hospitality, retail, etc. So the buildings that we see in our communities, and which generally the decision-making around these buildings is made collectively or by developer organizations, REITs, etc. I began my pre-architectural career at Barnard Columbia in New York City, where I'm currently still a resident of that area. And my first degree was actually in political science, and then moved later into architecture. And that foundation of the intersection of people and behavior and power and control with what is the built world around us is really the intersection of my interest, passion, and I also think our power in relation to transformation and sustainability. I arrived at MIT in 1999 in the last century. My focus was on high performance green building and sustainable design. This was at an era where maybe the term green was being incorporated. It was pre many of the metrics that we have these days. And I would say the closest to what I was interested in at the time, we now call living buildings, buildings buildings that are actually focused on making less of, instead of making less of a negative impact, actually making a net positive impact, whether that is through recycling, the way they manage and process water, through having solar on them, etc. This image is from the Eden project in the UK, which I was delighted to have an opportunity to contribute to in some of my work at an engineering firm called Arup over in London on a year out during my MIT master's program.
Wow.
The other thing I learned in the very beginning of my time at MIT, which was sort of the record scratch moment of my career, is that the biggest energy leak in buildings is, some of you may have guessed it, the collective impact of all of our human behavior. It's not the windows, it's not the doors, it's not any specific building system unto itself. It certainly isn't our capability as humans to engineer fantastic buildings. It is actually then what goes on in those buildings after we've built them and handed them over to their tenancy. And so that has really been the inspiration of my career. Also, as we think about the future of architecture, we might imagine that the most sustainable buildings may be the ones that we don't build, and thinking differently about how we occupy space, what we need, what the programmatic requirements are, particularly for large buildings, and choosing not to build something may also have a tremendous impact. And designing for the future means nudging, not just building. So this real focus on both how we understand people and performance before and after we design a building, but now how we might use environmental psychology and social research to inform the behavior that goes on in buildings so we can actually encourage more healthful, responsible, sustainable behaviors as these buildings are being occupied. Part of my time at MIT was to focus on the ways that we no longer necessarily consider the people-based metrics of buildings to be purely soft metrics. Historically, we have measured buildings by cost per square foot, these things that might be geometric and financial in nature. But it is an absolutely fascinating moment in time. Ever since my time at MIT nearly 25 years ago, that we can actually put quantitative figures to the performance of buildings as it relates to behavior in the building's ability to contribute positively to social interaction. And we all know, of course, the importance of the health and wellness benefits. We could even imagine that a building could reduce the cost of healthcare for a surrounding community. Another aspect of my time at MIT was that of learning not just the metrics of buildings, but to some extent the philosophy and ethos behind design and building. I always love to say that Vitruvius, long before he was featured in the Lego movie, was a structural engineer and architectural philosopher who wrote that the way we should measure buildings, the way we should measure the wellness of buildings, is that of commodity, firmness, and delight. And this is really the foundation of our work. Firmness being, does the building stand up? Can it last the test of time? We can do that with engineering. That's not a problem. Commodity, meaning what is the economic performance or the utility of that building. But the most fascinating moment is now that we can actually have consistent and sustainable metrics that allow us to understand the delight, the people performance of a building. How is a building bringing about an experience, and how can we measure that and compare it to other considerations? 12 years ago, I started my own firm, Plastark, in order to bring this social research, people analytics, environmental psychology-based lens to buildings in work and place. Our focus is really on putting together a holistic viewpoint of transformation across people, process, and space, not just changing the building, but changing the environments and changing the behaviors that are going on in that building. This is actually work that we did with Lululemon on the right-hand side, who were focused on creating the healthiest workplace. Certainly healthfulness is as much about behavior, as we all know, as it is the building that provides that. Part of the work that we do, I describe as weaving big and little data together, big data being the information systems, the ones and zeros that come out of building operating systems or systems that may be running the HVAC and control systems, and little data being the stories that we hear from people about how their buildings are serving their requirements and how they might operate differently in the future. One of the things that inspired this approach of our work at Plastarc is having the experience early in my architectural career that even great spaces, beautiful spaces that you think people would love and adore and occupy didn't serve the requirement because people didn't know how to use them or have an understanding of their value or even the story of why they had been designed or what benefit that they could add. So many buildings can be designed to speak for themselves, but we also have to do the work of communicating about the value of the work that we're doing. In that regard, green buildings alone aren't enough. We must consider simultaneously the performance of the building, its ecological impact, and the performance of the people. The performance of the people being both they get their work done? Can the building deliver what it is supposed to do from a functional capacity? And then are people able to be contributing positively to those solutions? Another inspirational project from my perspective is in maybe a negative category. This building by Morphosis, many of you may be familiar with the San Francisco Federal Building, was designed to be entirely passively cooled. You can imagine with the weather of San Francisco, breezes coming across that location, that you could have, as you can see on the right, this passively cooled environment. It was never able to operate as intended because the tenant, the US government, could not convince their own organizations not to have walls and partitions. They couldn't convince them to have the low profile workstations that would be required in order to have the passive cooling. So this is an environment where the engineering solution could not be accomplished because of the human behavior not being able to be changed. So in our viewpoint, smart buildings are social buildings, and we can use layers of technology. You might think of an app for a building where that app can guide you through a building. It can give you nudges and cues about how the building is operating and your contribution to it. This is just a map of the ways that our own technology that we might hold in our hands intersects with these smart building systems. And we really see the future as not just the built form of the architecture helping to nudge these human behaviors, but also these devices that we hold in our back pockets contributing in real-time ways. So if you're in an environment, you could literally get a nudge about an aspect of that environment. However, I do want to warn that it's not all smooth sailing. As I've already mentioned, the next generation of design must work inside the buildings that already exist. This is anathema to some maybe historic architectural perspectives. And while teleworking has enabled a new approach to work and place, where we play, where we live, where we work, etc., there are certainly risks on the horizon, and I don't ever want to be on stage without reminding people that both video conferencing and AI, which are the foundation of contemporary ways of working, have a significant carbon footprint that we can't look away from. So while we may have shifted from driving our cars to the office back and forth and maybe misusing some of those interior environments with our new ways of working, we haven't solved the puzzle yet. And that's it. I hope some food for thought and some inspiration to our three-way conversation up ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, three of you. We did have a question in the chat about timber, the different materials that one might use for doing the work that you like to do that will make sustainable buildings. Do any of the three of you have some comments on that?
I put in the chat one of my favorite organizations called Wood at Work. That is an organization that is focused on sustainable forestry and connecting forest communities with actual architectural projects. I think they're a super organization, and one of the things that fascinates me about the mass timber category is that one of the things that prevents the use of mass timber is actually the insurance industry, where there is an absence of confidence in the performance of that mass timber. So while humans have been building with wood for much of our human history, somehow mass timber shows up as a new material and is not trusted for the purposes that many architects and designers would be happy to be using it for.
There's a major timber conference going on right now for a mass timber conference in Portland. So I shared that, but the conference is happening, but clicking around their site, there will be organizations and resources. So maybe that's a way to also learn.
It's interesting that an old paper mill in Maine now is doing timber insulation, which they're working very hard on the fire aspects of it. And we weren't really able to convince the builder to try it yet, but it's very interesting. Of course, there's less need for paper, and this building was there. But that there's all kinds of focus now on lower embodied carbon materials, rock wool for insulation instead of oil-based plastics, and other. Some places are trying to get lower the embodied energy of concrete as well, or not use slabs, just footings, and have a solid wooden slab.
I mentioned living buildings, which the organization or the category Living Building Challenge is about making buildings that are this less negative, not just less negative, but more positive impact on their environment. Their next conference is in Portland in May. So I've put that in the chat. A fascinating organization with an important mission. And they also are focused on the fact that it is not just the buildings that we need to transform, but also the behavior and the social structural elements as well.
Yeah, living buildings really are the leading edge and amazing. Maybe some of the audience knows this or not, but it's not only do they have to meet criteria, which you do for every standard, but they have to operate for a full year, measuring operations and showing that all the criteria, the operational criteria, are met during that year. So it actually takes longer to earn the certification and really prove your building is operating in a sustainable way. And the criteria is really leading edge and fascinating.
Right. Very interesting.
So one of our key things is going to have to be how to electrify many of the things, and even before that, how to reduce our energy needs. You've all touched on these, but do you have a few more comments on how to reduce your energy use and how to electrify? I mean, somebody put in the chat about induction stoves, which are great. I love it.
Yeah.
That's
But,
People realize how
please,
bad gas stoves were.
I would say the key thing to reiterate about gas,
what kind of things do you do in a room so people don't use as much electricity?
Well, first of all, for those who don't know, gas, I grew up with, natural gas being advertised and we all wanted a gas stove and now we're learning about, all the health effects. So one of the most important things to do for health is to make sure you have a hood and you use it. It's one of the easiest bang for the buck things you can do is turn that hood on. But in terms of electrifying, I have a colleague who talks about the order of operations one might go in, right? Like, so, first of all, I would not strictly on electrifying, but first of all, I would recommend people get an energy audit if we're talking residentially, and air seal and insulate their homes before you even talk about what you're going to do with your energy, because you want to right size any equipment or any decisions you make for your home if you're thinking holistically for big projects. For replacing equipment, I think one of the most important things to do is to have a plan, right? To be ready before your equipment quits on you, right? To know what you want to get, because in the middle of January in a snowstorm, when your water heater goes or your furnace goes, you're going to take what's in stock available and it's going to cost you a lot more. So try and anticipate, and pick out and buy more sustainable, more energy efficient appliances. So induction is great for health. It may not be the biggest bang for a buck energy wise, but definitely HVAC equipment. We're all hearing a lot about heat pumps would be important, but your appliances, look up, the best Energy Star has to offer, and start replacing equipment, ideally before it breaks, but with more energy efficient equipment. And I'd love to hear what Margaret and Melissa have to add.
Well, I just say in New Hampshire, we're finding increasingly that you need to go through, well, you need to find the builders and the installers, and they will know about um, uh, programs and rebates and things like that. So for solar panels, you're looking at the most recent ones nearby and tracking them down. It's doing research really, and the same for cooling and heating. How much cooling are we going to need in New Hampshire? Probably not that much. So heating is the main thing, and if we can keep it very highly insulated and airtight, we should be able to use a minimum of heat in the winter. Um, it's tracking down the most recent jobs that people have done locally, and getting these people, installers of heat and or plumbers, to tell you, can you get a hot water heater that doesn't have a tank? We're trying one of those. I don't know if it's going to work, but that's, I mean, it will work, but how long it will work for. That's why these community organizations are so useful, because our, A4 sheet, 8.5 by 11 sheet, gives the name of the builder, where they got it, and whether they like it or not. And so, that's quite a handy thing. But Allison's data is going to give some of that, I would assume. You're going to have comments from people on there?
That's the idea, to get all these conversations going and have people share what they like, what they didn't like. We've shared our project. I'll be honest with you, it took me over 3 years to do a major VRF heat pump HVAC project in Massachusetts, which is a leading state for energy efficiency, right up there with California. But the workforce is tight and people are retiring, and we had to wait. We had companies that were recommended that would sell us heat pumps, but they didn't want to work on our boilers, and companies that would come in and do the boilers, but not work on the heat pumps. And I really wanted a holistic project that could look at increasing our efficiency and lowering our consumption. And it was a haul. And I'll be honest with you, I like to be optimistic. And I'm so excited about this market and this industry and our future and what I do. But I do sometimes think, if it's this hard for me to do this kind of project when I care so much, what if someone, can't wait and doesn't have the patience? It's concerning that it's that hard to get these things to happen.
I 100% agree. I'm pretty pessimistic about the consumer products industry and the home goods world everything from the brevity of warranties on appliances. They may be very, even the ones that might have, for example, an Energy Star rating, if they only last for 4 years and then get dropped in a landfill, that really isn't a sustainability benefit in any way, shape, or form. Again, back to regulatory environments and insurance. A personal anecdote, had a passively cooled and natural gas and fire heated home with high thermal mass, and we couldn't get household insurance because it didn't have a traditional heating and cooling ducted system, which was a completely inappropriate technology for the geography. So there are a lot of commercial strings that are being pulled mostly through financial mechanisms that are making it hard. And you're absolutely right, Allison. If a building industry professional can't get things done the way that they would like to see, then it's hard to imagine that a regular human would be able to accomplish that. I do want to give a shout out for a really cool program I put in the chat called MIT Design X. This is a course 4 and 11 architecture school based innovation program. We select teams in the fall and then coach teams in the spring every year. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary, and these teams are doing work to change and transform these conditions, these systemic conditions that are, everything from finding new ways to ensure through groups and collectivities, to getting people information in myth busting. We often think that it would be great to replace the windows in a building. And then if you look at this very closely, while it can be good to seal your home, it may be better to put in a second layer or a storm window, because glass is incredibly high energy carbon footprint. And it may be far less effective than just adding insulation. Certainly not as sexy transformation, and may actually be cheaper and more effective. And the commercial world just doesn't have it in its interest to get some of those messages out.
I love myth busting.
This has been great. Unfortunately, we didn't see a whole lot of questions in the chat, so we ended up doing most of the hour, but we appreciate it. Thank you very much, my 3 panelists. And I wanted to say that EESN, our webpage is just eesen.alumcommunity.mit.edu. We do advertise our monthly webinars. We advertise the events and programs that the other alumni groups do. And we have recorded this session. It won't be up on the web for a while. It has to be checked through and the transcript made correct. But I want to thank you all on the subject of water, but it's kind of from a what's out there for making clean water attitude. It's on 9th of April, so we've at least made it into Earth Month by then, and we hope to see many of you again in the future. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to Moana and team at MIT AA, and thank you to Sarah for bringing us all together.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.